Thank you for staying with us. 2023 is just ahead, and 2023 speaks to the general elections in Nigeria. And, excuse me, naturally, one of the things that gives issues, thoughts to many people, that drives anything is information, communication, essentially. But let's talk about information or misinformation or disinformation. They are two different. They are two different things. So we'll talk about all of that. So the challenges the societies face in this day, and age, the rapid spread of false or untrue information all over the place.
Otherwise known as fake news.
Otherwise known as fake news. And of course, there are those who say it's largely facilitated by social media. So let's have the conversation around how we can reduce the spread of fake news. At least that's the big word as far as the federal government is concerned. We have three individuals joining us this morning. Adeola Kayode is a communication strategist. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
He's in Lagos, Nigeria. Shubowale Temiloluwa is lead consultant, Intelligence Interactive Limited, joins us virtually from Canterbury in the UK, as well as Mayowa Tijani, who is a journalist, joining us from Accra in Ghana. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, so let's begin with you, Mr. Kayode. Perhaps by way of definition, we have an idea what misinformation is, but maybe for the purpose of clarity, you want to give us an idea or your understanding from a communication strategy perspective. The journalist will know the difference between misinformation and disinformation. We'll go to him, but what's your own take, first of all?
It has evolved, and I will ultimately just talk about it from a broad perspective of what we now then call fake news. Because ultimately what has happened is the normal activities where people spread wrong information has now been subsumed with many forms and is powered by human beings' accessibility to information and the ability to be able to share it with other people. So all that is subsumed under misinformation, where you unknowingly share information that is wrong. And if you have WhatsApp now, you probably will be hearing or receiving a lot of messages where you are sharing information that is wrong. You are misinforming people unknowingly. But then disinformation ultimately is now the deliberate, intention to spread information with the intention to actually misinform. So ultimately, misinformation is powered by disinformation.
So if you're disinforming, you are doing it on purpose. You know that it is not.
You know that it
is not true.
Yes, you know.
But you're spreading it. You are misinforming the people.
The people, yeah.
So for people who don't know, let me spare you. Let me ask the journalist, because your profession, okay, let me own it too. Our profession, we've been largely accused of being perverse sometimes, and so as a result, along the line, we're expected to, what's the word now, self-regulate, self-censor yourself. So as a media house, you don't misinform or even disinform. But then there are those who will, first of all, point fingers at just how easy is it to sometimes verify information before you send it. Let's take the instance of the cards, the photo cards that were found in a particular location. There are those who are saying it's Imo, and then those who are saying it's Port Harcourt. I don't know. From that angle, using that as an example, it's not a perfect example, but how easy is it to get or verify information in order to avoid misinforming people? Speak from a professional perspective as a journalist.
Thank you very much. I think that the first problem we have in that regard is that there is a general appeal to human beings to want to share information as quickly as possible, especially when the kind of information that you think that the other person does not have. So you feel like you have a first mover advantage to share a certain kind of misinformation that you found. Now, the problem with that is that as journalists, we know, maybe by training, that there's need to verify a certain piece of information. But for us, even for us, there's what we refer to as confirmation bias. So if you've been saying before now that INEC has not been doing a good job, and then you find that kind of information anywhere, your confirmation bias pushes you to want to immediately share it so that it aligns with what you already believe. So that piece of information only proves what yourself want to believe about the situation with which INEC is handling information. Now, if you're someone else who has been saying INEC has been doing an incredible job, you love what they're doing, this, that, when you find that kind of information, you don't immediately want to share it because it does not align with your confirmation bias. It doesn't confirm what you already believe. So I think that one of the ways we can deal with this is that when we see a piece of information that we think aligns with our existing position, we are more vulnerable to sharing that information, which might be wrong. So when you find something that aligns with what you already believe, take a step back, check up on that kind of information. And the way the world is today, it's really, in my opinion, easy to get a second source, a third, a fourth. You just need to probably put that kind of picture into a Google image search and see where that picture is coming from. If it's not available, you might just want to check how many people have reported it, and then align it with general common sense. Okay, so if this is here, what could have happened? What could have led to it? Once you're able to answer some of those questions, it is easier to get to the bottom of an issue when you think of it in that sense.
Perhaps the challenge sometimes, Mr. Tijani, is the sources of confirmation or confirming those things. You're into fact-checking. Maybe you want to advise people on, how they can get that done, because sometimes it's just, what's the word now? It just feels good to not even do the wahala, as we say, in this part of the world. So in terms of verifying, are there processes to go about it? Yes, I get the argument about, confirmation bias and all of that, but it's not everyone that has that bias. Even those journalists, as you said, sometimes also are guilty of the same thing. So it's not just a professional thing, it's a personal thing. So if it aligns with your personal objective, whether you're a journalist or whatever, it wouldn't matter. So are there tools or places that one can be sure that this is the correct information? Because sometimes if you Google that particular information that confirms your bias, come on, you'll find 100.
Right. So there are situations like that, and of course there are tools to check things like that. Now, generally, what I would normally suggest is the Google reverse image search. There are a number of them, but I think Google reverse image search is the quickest. So if it's a picture, even if it's a video, you could take a screenshot. Just make sure that you get an image out of the situation and feed it to Google reverse image search. That is easily done. If you go to Google search, normally the way we use Google search is to search for a certain thing, and then maybe search term. Let's say, where is this picture from? And then, of course, in that sense, you necessarily cannot update. You necessarily cannot upload the picture. But once you said that, when the result comes out, you see all, then you see images, then you see news, then you see other sorts. So you click on images. When you click on that, there is going to be an image icon where you can click on and upload that certain image to Google to search for that image. Now, when you search for that image, if the image had been online before the set date, you see where it was, what the situation was, what the context was, before you make a decision about that kind of image.
Mr. Shomali, now for the uninitiated, I'm talking about people like me, I mean, those of us who are really analog, so to speak, is there a way that we can identify fake news?
Again?
Mr. Shomali?
Yes, I didn't hear the last part.
I said, is there a way we can identify fake news?
Well, the easiest way, because what Mayowa just said is quite a long process, and I don't think that many people will do it. I think I wouldn't, even being a tech person, it took me years to learn how to do reverse image search. So I think the box still stops with the news agencies to be quick in responses to things that happen. So when something is coming up, the agencies need to go in there and do their fact checking as fast as possible and put out the right information without bias, like you said, because most people listen to these agencies and there's no trust for now because people know that a particular news channel is working for this party or so. Even when you bring the information out, it has to be truthful and honest. So there has to be a point where trust has to be built back for the agencies. So when you say that this thing happened in X and X and X, I'd rather believe you than believe something from somebody from the blues. As opposed to when you say, oh, this they are saying is their bias, let me try and check with my friend and next. So the easiest part is to make sure that the agencies have the tools, I mean the journalists and news agencies have the tools to quickly identify what is trending and deal with it as fast as possible and bring out the right facts and inform people, dissolve disinformation and misinformation as quickly as possible. Because there are benefits to disinformation and misinformation, that's the truth. When you misinform and you have a big website, there will be lots of clicks to your website, who will visit it, they will read about the website, and you have advertising revenue, right? The earlier we are able to tell people that the information is wrong, the earlier they stop visiting those websites and their revenue model goes down. Because truth is, misinformation gets shared more, it gets more clicks than the real information. And we know in journalism that bad news moves faster than even good news. So it's the same thing, it's the reverse. So I think agencies need to now sit down and have teams that can have fact checks as fast as possible. You understand? Deal with the information and disseminate the information as quickly as possible so that the trend and the speed at which the other one is going is halted and the one that you have would now overtake. Because that's the fastest way. I don't think people will do research. I think people are lazy to do technology. To use technology as like Dan is saying it, right? Even using phones to the maximum of what the capability of the phones are, is people able to do. So doing research is what people don't want to do. You just want to get, and people they don't apologize when they are used. So I think I'll ask the organizations doing journalism to step up their game in that area and help us halt the information. So when something is wrong, they say it is wrong quickly and they stop it. When it is right, it's this thing is right and everything. And they should be wary of taking sides with parties. They should leave their biases when they are reporting because that will affect your audience. Your audience will know you are biased about this person. Whatever you write about that person, they won't believe you. Or they
Mr. Shabawale, I was actually talking about the individual, not agencies.
Okay.
The individual who gets a piece of information. How can he determine at first sight or at the shortest possible time that this piece of information is fake?
Well, what I will use as an individual is just maybe my sense of technology to say, look, has this thing happened before, right? What was my experience with this before? If something is saying something happened in Warri last week, and you're saying that X number of people died in an inferno. Let me give an instance. He said, over the last 2 months, there have been things happening in the country. They said X number of people died, one person died. And the next thing to hear in other news in 2 days' time is 100 people died from an inferno. Do you understand? If the variance is too much, for me, the first step is to say, look, this is different from what I know. This is totally out of what I've read from reliable sources, right? I'll discountenance it until it is confirmed. For me, that's the best way to look at it.
Until it is confirmed by conventional media or by whom?
Yes, by conventional media, not any other source, by conventional media. It has to be confirmed from conventional media.
Okay. Do you agree with him, Mr. Kayode? Because sometimes, do you agree that the only major way to confirm will be through conventional media?
No, not necessarily. And I think everybody has a responsibility. As we were talking, I remembered Wole Soyinka said that the Third World War was going to be started by fake news. and it's likely going to be started by Nigerian, you know. So for us having a confluence, you know, of access to data, ability to be able to share, and then a lot of biases around religion, region, class, we almost have the recipe to be able to do that. So as an individual, whenever the kind of information comes to you, I think you have a responsibility to ask yourself a few questions. Number one, this information has come. Why do you want to share it? You know, yes, people have this very nice feeling, you know, to be able to share gossip, you know, but you need to be sure the kind of information. So first check the information. I've seen people share information about something happening in California, in the US, in Florida, and I've asked, sorry, do you know anything about this? No, they said there's a car missing and the plate number is from Florida. How come you shared it? You know, so I think if people ask themselves whether they want to look foolish at the end of the day, because you've shared a lot of this and then people come back to fact check you, then you will step back a bit. Number one. Number two, again, is to ask yourself, what's the source of this information? Most times when these things come out, you hear, and I mean, we could talk about a lot of platforms, troll factories that actually created, you know, or manufactured or fabricated to spread this kind of news. Not necessarily because of website clicks and money, but also to be able to shape perception and opinion, particularly during the political season. I'm trying to shape. So we need to be careful, you know, how those shape or skew just because of personal or political gain also end. So I need to have that responsibility to check the source. You know, you find sites where you have never heard the news source before. Yes. You know, so I mean, what you sharing? I always like to tell people, don't be a MAGA. Because at the end of the day, by the time you share, and people begin to tell you, sorry, what have you, it's a problem. Next thing, again, is does this already shift your perspective in a completely biased way? Okay. Because most times when those platforms, they actually have an aim. So if you ask yourself, this is completely left, then you need to ask yourself whether you want to be a media channel.
The point Mr. Shubali made is that to confirm, sometimes you need to get it from the from the correct source. That's the people like Mr. Tijani who sell information, if I can use that term, who sell authentic information.
So that was my last point, where you already have trusted platforms, sources, where, I mean, research has already proven that most people, and particularly Nigerians, get their information from WhatsApp and social media. That's their first source. So to be able to do that, you need the other sources, you know, that you need to go back to and validate. There's some that have been available. A site that just started 6 months ago that is saying news. You should know already that this is designed for a specific season. It's likely going to go off after the election. So yes, I agree with you. You need to confirm those sources. But first, even before you move and share, those simple things, like I think you were mentioning the fact that going through that journey to go and check, if you ask yourself those basic questions, I think we will slow down in how we can share this information that may ultimately bite us back.
Mr. Tijani, last week, someone called me that they had watched some TV station in their news say that the price of fuel, PMS, had gone up to 385 naira. And I said, well, listen to another station. Keep listening to television and radio stations. If the news gets repeated, then it is true. If you don't hear it again, then it is fake news. That was my advice to the person. Was I right? Of course, it ended up to be fake news.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, you can clearly say that you're right. So yes, that's excellent advice. One of the very first ways to deal with misinformation is to check the sources, and of course, to have multiple sources. Now, in my experience, I also understand that there are times when multiple sources are wrong. So, for example, if a story was put out falsely by, say, a news agency that is said to be trusted, now the number of big media that are sort of subscribed to that news agency will probably share that story. So you see it in multiple trusted places. So an example would be, there was a time when it was reported that a monkey swallowed or stole 6.8 million in his zoo in Kano. Was it a monkey or a lion? Something like that.
And then a snake in Lagos, yes.
It was reported by a news agency. And from there, it was reported by many of the big guys. Now, what we eventually found in that station was in this particular set place, that particular animal was not even found. So the whole story of the animal stealing the money was not even possible based on the premise that that animal was not in that zoo. So in that instance, a number of big organizations might have got it wrong, which is where the whole personal gatekeeping also comes in. And I know that many of us don't like that. We prefer that somebody has done the work and then just tells us is it true or false. But I think that where the world is going, misinformation, disinformation is going to get a lot more sophisticated. And as that happens, the people who live in that world must also come to that level of sophistication that we can, at the gates, determine whether this is right or wrong, whether this is possible. Or there's something I say to my friends, that truth is a stronghold. So in that kind of situation, if you had used the strongholds of the truth to say, okay, when did in history has an animal swallowed this kind of money? So if you just suppose that by the truth that you already had existing in your fence or at your stronghold, you will know that that is likely going to be false, and you will not believe immediately.
Don't forget that. Don't forget that we live in a wild world, a world of odd news. So all kinds of odd things could happen. But
so a monkey can't eat money in that odd world.
Anyway,
or a snake eats money.
Gentlemen, let's take this too. There's something I think it was Mr. Shubowale that mentioned it. That it raised a question in my mind, and I'd like us to take that conversation, perhaps the rest of this conversation that way. One of the questions that's come to my mind, okay, when Mr. Shubowale was talking, he talked about those who do it for commercial purposes, for the advert clicks and all those things. So there is a kind of reason for it, a kind of motivation for it. The question that came to my mind that moment when you said that thing was, how does this affect nation building? If there was a national ethos that people can champion with good news or authentic news, if there is a system that people are proud of and they want to protect as much as possible. Nobody, for instance, wants any bad news spread about their families. Nobody wants to put out negative news, negative information about their personal lives, about their personal families. Everyone wants to protect what belongs to them. So do you think that the spread of fake news could be as a result of a lack of patriotism, a lack of trust in government, that anything that comes from government, in fact, the more salacious, the better? How do you think we can begin to rearrange that order so people are more protective of national interests in the sharing of whatever information, or in the protection or pushing off of fake news that can destroy the image of the nation?
Well, in my opinion, government needs to do better in this regard, because there have been times when news comes out, feeds in as news, and government will say this is fake news, and a few days after it gets confirmed. Issues like that cause people not to trust government and will rather not listen to them. So if we are doing nation building and we're trying to align and do things the right way, government and governance have to align in such a way that whatever you are telling me from government must be the truth and nothing but the truth. Because as soon as I find out that you are not telling the truth, then I won't believe you. It will be difficult to do nation building. I'll look for other sources to believe, because I believe that when you say something, it is not the case. That is for me the basis of fake news and government control. Because again, when government now says they want to control the narrative to say there's fake news, there's this, sometimes it may gag news. There may be news and information that was researched by an individual that is being brought up, and the government does not want to know about it. Now, when you say it is fake news or you tag it as fake news, and people now find out it is true, they will trust the source more every time the source speaks to things, right? So we have to find a way for government to say, look, what I'm saying is true and nothing but the truth. And if people have to follow us, then the journalists too will work, because I think NAN is doing a good work of bringing out the right news. Okay. But again, government should do their bit to bring out the right information every time, all the time, so that it reduces people looking for fake news, knowing that, look, this news will change in another few days.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Timlulua. Mr. Kaudi, you're a communication strategist. Let me use one example and how, if you agree with him, government can begin to, perhaps help us understand how government has been doing it, if you agree with Mr. Shubwale, and maybe there is a rearrangement that is necessary somewhere. I think it was March or thereabouts in 2020, the federal government said fuel subsidies removed permanently because fuel prices were, what's it called? The price of crude fell tremendously in that particular time during the pandemic, during the lockdown, global lockdown, pandemic and all. But then, only recently, we're hearing, I think the GMD of NNPC saying the role or the function of removing fuel subsidy completely belongs to that of the federal government. Now, on one hand, we heard it was completely removed. Then after some time, we heard the Minister of State for Petroleum say partially removed. And then now we're hearing it's the federal government that has the last word on that one. As a strategist, talking about giving authentic information out in the interest of national image, how should that kind of thing, for instance, don't forget I said for instance, if that instance doesn't work, you're at liberty to use another. Should government be addressing such so that government officials, information from government can be far more trustworthy and not doubted as fake news?
So I think the number one thing to deal with fake news is accountability and consistent engagement, such that if as a communications person you have the responsibility to engage people, you have to understand what the facts are on ground before engaging, because most times things happen. I think even starts from the fact that we ultimately, if you don't lay down the facts or lead, with the right information, consistency, staying in front of the news, you have to be responsive. Which I think Mr. Shibola was talking about, people going to look for other sources, investigating and bring all those things, and then you will have to be responding. So lead with information, lead with depth. So that you know the facts, and don't respond first and then find out the facts later. If I don't have the facts, I don't have the facts, but we will get back to you. So that when we come back, we are laying the facts bare. So that everything, prices have come down, this is it, we are hoping this will happen, and these are the steps we are taking. But then all that stands under the foundation of accountability, which is actually a very, very different terrain or conversation to have when it comes into politics.
I guess you say accountability is another conversation altogether. Mr. Tijani, you last on this particular issue of government, information from government being reliable as opposed, from your experience as a journalist, there's the people, information from people, and then there's information from government. How do we balance both so that we can at least begin to stem this tide of misinformation ahead of the general elections?
Thank you. So one thing that is clear, and this has been the issue for a while now, is that trusting government is not a lot within our climate. So because people don't particularly trust government, what government says versus what other people say, people often believe people. So for example, if government says that there was an attack somewhere and 5 people were killed, once the journalists, even without even asking anybody, the journalist has an immediate thought that, government is playing down the figure. And this is based on the history of lack of trust between the government when it comes to information sharing in that sense. So to actually deal with this, government has to make a deliberate decision to say we want to control how we share information when it comes to issues that have to do with government. And when we are sharing this information, it has to be coordinated. Not that the Ministry of Information is saying A, the State House is saying B, the Ministry of Petroleum is saying C. and then people are left guessing to say, oh, what's the actual information here? So I feel like there should be some sort of coordination within the system, within government, for answering every question. If you, like, of course, like he said, if you don't have the answers, don't speculate.
Especially at the time when, I keep asking one question. For God's sake, most of the people that are in government today were not in government 30 years ago. Well, that's another conversation altogether. For now, we have to thank you, gentlemen, for being a part of our conversation this morning. Mr. Adeola Kayode, Communication Strategist, thank you for joining us this morning. Shobowale Timilulua, Lead Consultant, Intelligent Interactive Limited, joined us virtually from Canterbury in the UK, as well as, of course, Mr. Maya Watijani, who you can see now, who's just been changed. Is a journalist, joined us from Accra, Ghana. Gentlemen, well, you see, that's Mr. Tijani. The other one is Mr. Shubwali. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you.